This is the story of a terrible mother. She took the title of America's Most Hated Mom. This is the story of Susan Smith. So this is Susan Smith. She is the youngest of 3 children, and she had a terrible childhood. Her biological father, whom she adored, unalived himself when she was only 6 years old, and was a victim of SA at the hands of her stepfather, who not only admitted to doing it, but admitted to having a consensual affair with her as an adult. This deeply affected her, and she tried to take her own life when she was 13 and again when she graduated high school. While she was working at a grocery store, she started a relationship with David Smith, who she went to high school with. It was a really tumultuous relationship. There were indiscretions on both of their parts. They both had a lot of chaos in their life, and a big part of their relationship was comforting each other. The marriage resulted in 2 children, Michael and Alexander. However, after years of being on and off, David and Susan decided to divorce. Susan got a new job and worked her way up to be an executive secretary, which elevated her socially and financially. And she caught the attention of one of South Carolina's most eligible bachelors, none other than this guy. His name is Tom Findley, and Susan was smitten. As far as Susan was concerned, a life with Tom Findley was a life of financial security and happiness. Unfortunately, Tom did not feel the same way. I think things on his end were a little more cash, and he wound up writing her this letter, which is here, and you can pause to read, but it says that her children were a big reason why he didn't want to continue seeing her. And from what I've read, it seems like Susan had some other relationships with people around the office and developed a kind of unsavory reputation. She was absolutely devastated and tried desperately to get him back. But Tom Findley was having none of it. He was done. Then on October 25th of 1994, Susan shows up on a random person's doorstep, screaming hysterically and pounding on the door. Something terrible had happened. Susan was carjacked, and her 2 children were in the car, and they are missing. She said the suspect was a black man, and this is the sketch artist's drawing. The children's father, David, was devastated, and he supported Susan through all of this. But for 9 days while her children were missing, this was the story that she was pushing. However, the more she spoke, the more inconsistencies started appearing in her story, which I'll talk about in part 2. This is the story of an evil mother. This is part 2 of the story of Susan Smith. So picking up where we left off, Susan Smith claims that she was carjacked by a black man while her children were still in the car, and they have been missing for 9 days. And again, this is the sketch artist's drawing of her description of the suspect. Susan did a lot of press and talked to the police multiple times, and her story was riddled with holes. She also took several polygraph tests, and they were all inconclusive. And a lot of her friends reported that her behavior was odd. Like, she was obsessed and constantly talked about whether or not her ex-lover Tom Findley was going to come and see her, and didn't really seem too concerned about the whereabouts of her missing children. After 9 days of intense scrutiny from the police, Susan Smith finally revealed the truth about what had happened to her 2 children. Susan says that on the night of October 25th, she was driving with Michael and Alexander in the car, and she was also feeling lonely and desperately sad, and she planned to take her and her children's life. And her plan was to drive to a lake and drive the car into the lake with them all in there. However, Susan backed out last minute and decided not to save Michael and Alexander. So she got out of the car and watched the car roll into the lake with her 2 children still strapped into their seats. Police recovered the car from the bottom of the lake, where they found both Michael and Alexander still in their seats, and it was determined that they were both conscious as it went in. At her trial, her defense team claimed that she had dependent personality disorder and severe depression, and her desire and need for a stable relationship with Tom Findley had overrode any sort of moral judgments that she had at the time. They also emphasized her traumatic childhood and her history with SA, and resulted in promiscuity and a deep dependence on others for her own happiness. The jury deliberated for 2.5 hours and found her guilty. She was sentenced to 30 years to life in prison, but she will be eligible for parole in 2025 when she is 53 years old. And here's a fun fact. 2 prison guards have been fired as a result of having inappropriate relations with Susan Smith, and resulted in her being transferred multiple times within the prison system. And that is the story of Susan Smith.